Go.
What's happening, guys? STP here again with the Dock Race 6266 single turbo DIY. Enjoy. Here's how I prepped the block. I went in layers, starting here with the dump tube, the oil feed line, the oil freeze plug, and both the coolant block offs. The bolts are from the stock setup and all torqued to 15 Newton meters. Once you had the first layer installed, I then went to install the water pipe and gasket, tighten with the stock bolts in a star pattern to 15 Newton meters, angle the AN fitting to the hose. This is only if you have an automatic transmission. Then I installed the water pump filled with some 50-50 mix of antifreeze, and then the thermostat. For the water pump, there's 3 E14 Torx external bits that are torqued to 10 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Once the water pipe is torqued down correctly, make sure the water pipe is aligned to both the 180-degree hose and the hose used for the transmission cooler, if applicable. Important to note is to use only aluminum bolts, not steel. It is important because it can cause an electrochemical reaction that would not be good. Reinstall the electrical connector and get ready to install the thermostat. This sits on top of the water pump and is secured with two 10mm bolts, torques to 8 Newton meters. This is a good time for some preventative maintenance and replace both of these pumps. Make sure that the electrical connection is plugged in. At this time, connect all of the coolant hoses.
It's all in our head. Fear and frustrations, chest pain sensations, I know. Try to isolate, side of cyberspace. Now I found another level, no I'm not a saint. Hating my mistakes, all the angels wait, but I'm dancing with the devil.
Here you can see that I'm reattaching the connection that transports coolant from one side of the engine to the other. This is the assembly where the extension for the coolant bottle is located. As you can see, I've trimmed it, barbed it, clamped it, and it's just dangling here that I will trim to fit later on. Prior to installing the twin scroll manifold on the car, detach cylinders 1 through 3 and 4 through 6 portions of it at the 2 V-bands. As you can see, I've already wrapped 1 through 3 up into the O2 bung. Things you need to wrap are the wrap itself, the metal zip ties, plastic ones and used as a helping hand, and some good scissors. Note, to facilitate the wrapping, you can use a spray bottle of water to moisten the wrap and actually make it more malleable. Wrap each pipe individually as best as you can until it becomes required to wrap the rest of the manifold. As seen, I use a plastic zip tie to help secure beginnings of the wrap. This can easily be removed and replaced with the metal one once you're satisfied with the wrapping. Once the zip tie is secured, you're ready to start wrapping each pipe individually, going down until the entire manifold is covered. Once the wrapping is complete and it's snug, replace all the plastic ties with the metal ones. Alright, the next step in finishing the manifold prep is to coat the new manifold gaskets with some anti-seize and place them bevel side up on each cylinder slot on the manifold, as seen here. Repeat this for all 6. Once this is complete, your manifold is ready to go in the car. Each manifold section has 8 nuts securing it. They are 15 millimeters, an offset box wrench, a deep 1/4-inch socket ratchet will make this easy job. Note that on 1 through 3 cylinders, second from the left, the nut needs to be slid over the stud before anything else is tightened down. If you don't do it this way, it'll be almost impossible to get it tightened. Here's the completely prepped manifold. It's reassembled. This is the way I chose to install it. Your way may be different. Note that I'm going to push the engine to clear the manifold. A second set of hands is better than one here. Here's the tightening pattern. All of the nuts are torqued to 15 foot-pounds. Before the final torques, slowly repeat the pattern until the donut gaskets are fully seated against the block. Next thing to do is prep both of the tile wastegates. Remove the nuts along the perimeter holding down top with the 3mm Allen. Remove the top. In addition, you'll need an 11mm socket or wrench, a 5mm hex key, your banjo fittings, your block off ports wrapped in Teflon tape. For the springs, I chose the green and white ones. You could choose what's right for your build. N54 Tech has all of their recommendations. Ensure here that the springs are fully seated. Think of your coil springs. They have a specific orientation. They need to be fully seated and correct. With your vice grips applied, reinsert all of the 3mm bolts along the perimeter and tighten in a crisscross pattern. Once the top is secured, add and tighten your banjo fittings. One is for the top of the wastegate and one is for the bottom of the wastegate. This is very important that you know which is which. This will come into play later. Alright, the second to last step here are the block off ports. Apply them with the 5mm Allen, and I will not go into the purpose of these ports right now. Lastly, take your gasket, apply a thin coat of oil and insert it to the bottom of the wastegate. Do this for both wastegates and your wastegates are prepped and ready to go in the car. Above listed are the tools needed to install the wastegates. Just a quick note on install, make sure you have a good seal by ensuring that the wastegate gasket is seated in the manifold housing fully. Here are the wastegates installed. It's pretty self-explanatory. Also, I have the top and the bottom ports plumbed together and ran up to the top until everything else is fully in position and ready to be installed on the solenoid. Again, do not mix these connections up. That will be major trouble. This is the main event. Precision 6266 turbo with ball bearings. Here's what is required to install the feed and the dump fittings. The 6mm Allen, a 13mm box wrench / open-ended wrench, the gasket, the fittings. Alright, let's get to it. Before the fittings can be installed, loosen the exhaust size 13mm bolts. This will allow the assembly to move freely and help us install the fittings. First, grab the gasket, the AN dump housing, and the two 6mm bolts, tighten to 10 Nm. Slowly apply the pressure evenly to each bolt until fully torqued. Right, good. Now grab the AN fitting. Hand tighten it for now until the turbo clock position is finalized. Next, grab the feed fitting. You can fully remove the exhaust side housing, but it's not needed. Rotate the whole assembly until you can hand tighten the fitting for now. Okay, to clock the turbo, I grab two studs and put them at each corner of the housing and hand tighten them. I remove the intake housing. I align the feed and the dump to where I want it. Tighten one of the exhaust bolts to keep it in place, and I tighten the fittings completely. Carefully, with precision, we're going to install this. Now I'm clocking the intake housing to the final position where I'll have adequate clearance to run the charge pipe, connecting the turbo outlet to the intercooler. Alright, exercise caution here to not bend, break, or warp any of the turbine blades. Once you're satisfied with the position, apply the gasket. Once you've looked over everything, go ahead and start applying the brackets and retightening the nuts. Make sure you have adequate clearance of both the feed and the dump fittings, and then go ahead and retighten all of the exhaust bolts. Alright, now that the turbo is clocked, you can remove that and then go on to installing the heat shield. There are 4 E8 bolts. These are stock bolts that run along the perimeter underneath the valve cover. Here's a picture of what that's going to look like. You're going to torque these to 8 Nm. So now time to install the hot slide piping. To free up some room, use an E14 to remove this bracket off the bell housing. Alright, to make installation easier with the two exhaust pieces, use a V-band as seen in the diagram. Insert this with a helper from bottom to top, leaving it loose for now. Alright, because I had to install and shoot, I'm doing a walk around of where I am up until now. As you can see as I walk around, essentially I just buttoned up the exhaust piping to the housing, attached the feed line, and you can kind of get an idea of the fitment so far. All the studs have been installed from the turbo to the manifold with the gasket applied in between them, and I torqued these down to 20 foot-pounds. You have to use a 13mm socket and a 5mm Allen. As you can see, it is not touching the strut tower, but it is close. The gasket really increased the sizing here. Before it was about a 1/2 inch of clearance before I added the gasket and tightened everything down. Alright, to gain a bit more clearance, I later installed a different T4 twin scrolled styled gasket. This is how I ran the feed line. This was the path of least resistance for me. Here's the dump tube. Just got it secured with a hose clamp. Here's the mid pipe attached to the car's exhaust. The O2 post cats installed. There is the V-band that we used to help install with the two exhaust pieces. And as you can see, there's plenty of clearance underneath here. All the way through, nothing is touching, but that V-band really helped installation of those two pieces. Tighten these down with the gaskets applied. There are 13 nut and 13 bolt. Here's the wastegate dumps. Position them how you need to get them away from the subframe. There's the rev shift mounts. Getting a look at our wastegates and how it's routed over the subframe and up into the top. Next, I installed the pre-cat O2 sensors. I reran the wires over the front of the engine to give me some more room and declutter the engine. I applied some heavy-duty sheathing, as you could see. Just a quick note, heat sheath everything. Your AC lines, your strut tower, wires, the coolant filler. Alright, now back to that coolant line that we mentioned earlier. I didn't shoot too much of this. This is just one way of doing it. You'll find your own way to reroute this coolant line, but this is just an example of how I did it. Here I'm just showing that the line doesn't touch a belt or a pulley, although it looks like it does. It's just zip tied on the AC line. Here we use the Dock Race extension bar to install the coolant tank. Alright, so here is where I traced the old vacuum lines to the brake booster. That's where I removed the vacuum lines and I cut them and capped them off, as you see. Again, something I didn't get too involved with shooting is the power steering reservoir relocation. Something that will vary from build to build, and here's an idea of how I did it. There's no real need to extend any of the hoses. I did add a slight extension though to that smaller diameter hose, maybe 6 inches. Again, where you relocate it will determine the amount of length, if any, you need to extend the hose. Okay, now that everything that is needed to be installed or capped off has been covered, now we're going to move on to plumbing the vacuum lines to the max solenoid. Here's a small visual of just kind of me going over the vacuum lines, but rely on the diagram to actually do this yourself. Like I said, this can result in some catastrophic results if this is not done correctly. So here's just a time lapse of me doing it. I just wanted to make a note real quick that though it's not shown or covered in the video, that it is implied that all of the intercooler piping has been installed and everything is connected. As you can see, I have the oil. I'm using a 5W40. I have my power steering fluid and my pre-mixed antifreeze. Go on and fill up all of these fluids.
I told you it was going to start up right straight when it
You got all this time to get those smoke in it. You got now,